I was asked to talk about kind of our emergency response in Florida and how we do things, and really the importance of animal identification. And primarily during an emergency, it's for ownership, proof of ownership, and then talk about kind of lessons learned, our organizational structure, how we handle emergencies, and I think that's it. So I'll try to cover that. And I think we do a good job in Florida responding to emergencies, but that's really because we seem to have a lot of them, right? With all the hurricanes and wildfires and screwworm and all those types of things. So we have practice, and that's probably what makes us good at it. So I'll talk a little bit about our organizational structure and how we handle emergencies. And again, that's any emergency. That's the screwworm, wildfires, and hurricanes. We seem to have a lot of hurricanes, and so again, we're good at that. So in Florida, emergency staffing function 17, which is animal, really it's all agricultural, and vector issues are under my office, the State Veterinarian's office. So when the Emergency Operations Center is activated in Tallahassee, we're staffing ESF 17. Again, that's animal issues. And then we run that with the incident command structure, like I'm sure most of other states do as well. And then we use our SART Partners as a huge help in managing these disasters, again, and also with county and local officials. And that's really how we, in a real brief nutshell, how we handle emergencies on any type of emergency. And again, we use the same, our SART Partners, our ESF 17, the ICS structure, to manage the screwworm outbreak in 16-17, to manage sometimes wildfires, help with those issues, agricultural issues, movement of animals, and then obviously the hurricanes. And our SAR Partners, we have over 25, and they are huge. I don't know if other states, if y'all how closely you work with your industry partners, but for us it's huge, and I don't know how we would do it without them. And so we engage our non-governmental partners, other governmental agencies, USDA, our wildlife folks, University of Florida Vet School, Cattlemen. Gene Lawless is back there in the back trying to hide. He's with the Florida Cattlemen Association. Great partners in helping us with cattle issues. And so really we listen to our partners. We get them involved from the very beginning. We train with them constantly. We do a lot of outreach. We do education. We have meetings every 2 months with our SART partners. So we do a lot of work to really train, keep in touch, and make sure we're prepared. Again, just a lot of training. We assist counties a lot, because all these emergencies are really initially local issues, county issues, right? So we work with them, the counties, frequently. In fact, we have our emergency staff meet with each county at least once a year, and their emergency management staff, and talk to them about being prepared for emergencies. And a big one for Florida, and if any of you are on the coast that potentially can get flooding, it's really, or I guess any emergency. I guess in the Midwest, what do y'all do? Tornadoes, earthquakes, blizzards, things like that. The counties are responsible for really the pet sheltering. And that's recently, and there's probably people in the room that understand kind of the timeline on that and the reasons, but FEMA has now put that in, I think, in the Stafford Act, where counties have to account for pet sheltering. And the reason is, and it makes sense, as y'all probably know or understand, many will not evacuate if they don't have a place to take their animal. So then they're going to stay home, right? Because they're parakeets and their cats and their dogs. They don't know where they can take them. There's not pet shelters open. They haven't made a plan ahead of time. And so now you've got the human issue. So now they're staying and they're getting flooded and they're in danger and they're calling for emergency rescue, and it's just not a good situation. So I think it makes sense. Our counties in Florida, even with all the hurricanes we've had and disasters, are still a little bit behind. This was a big wake-up call for a couple of our counties. One of my classmates is the shelter veterinarian for Lee County, which is one of the hard-hit counties, and she called me afterwards and said, we made it through, but it was a mess, and we want y'all to come talk to us again. We remember when you met with us and told us all these things, and we really didn't plan for it, and now our county commissioners are listening, so come back. So we're doing that. A lot of public messaging in Florida, asking citizens to be prepared. Have a plan for your pets, your family. Really think ahead. And y'all, again, probably know this. I mean, it's second nature to us, again, because we do a lot of this hurricane stuff and emergency messaging. But we try to really hit home, not just with our counties and SART partners, but with the public. So when we're talking at veterinary meetings, producer meetings, fairs, any opportunity we get, we want people to be prepared. So we talk about that. There's public service announcements. We have Bobby Bowden, the ex-Florida State football coach. He's doing public service announcements. Have a plan, be prepared, and think about your animals. What are you going to do with your animals? Do you have a plan? And we try to emphasize that pet sheltering is your last option, really. You want to try to find ahead of time pet-friendly hotels, relatives. Hey, maybe your mother-in-law, you can go visit her in North Georgia and bring your 4 dogs, right? Whatever it is, have a plan and evacuate when they say to evacuate, and have a plan for your pets, because it's a mess potentially if you don't. And so my little picture there is to remind me that that's really the shelter, the pet sheltering is the last resort. Identification is important. We've been doing better in Florida, I think, because of this messaging. But you can imagine if people don't have in their pets, at least, microchips or photographs or something to let folks know who they belong to. And it's always hectic, especially if you wait till the last minute. The wind's blowing, the fences are down, the kids are screaming, the dog runs away, and now you're trying to find your dog and prove to the animal shelter it's your dog, and that gets to be a real mess. And some of the animal shelters, if it's a bad emergency, get filled up really quickly. And you got, subsidized sheltering we're trying to help with, and trying to find your animal and all that, and then prove it's yours is tough. And some of these counties, for budget reasons, I hate to say it, normally they have a 3-day, 72-hour, and they'll euthanize them. I mean, they'll extend that in emergencies, but they can't go 2, 3, 4 weeks waiting for you to get back organized and find your pet. So we really encourage folks to have ID, to have pictures, to have microchips, those types of things, and have them registered. The same with livestock. ID your animals. The horses, we tell those folks to use travel bag ID tags and braid them in the mane, the tail. Microchips work great. Photographs, again, have ID. A lot of time, folks let their livestock and horses stay on property. It usually more so for the food animal type. If you have high enough ground that you open the fences, and usually the livestock will find higher ground. Horses, a lot of people want to haul them. And for Hurricane Irma, we had a lot of movement of horses. And of course, we're getting tons of calls. Half the people can't get a vet for a health certificate. We understand that. But they don't have their Coggins test, right? So if you live in Florida and the hurricanes are coming, they're coming every week. You've got a tropical storm out there. Why don't you have a Coggins test? So it gets a little bit frustrating for us because we have to accommodate for that, because we're not going to not let them move their animal. Because if we do that, what are they going to do? They're going to stay home. And then, again, that's a real danger to them and our emergency management folks, or first responders, et cetera. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we manage animal movement and those ID issues. I will say in Irma, we didn't have too many animal ID issues. There were a few loose horses, stray dogs and cats. Had some of that going on, not terrible. It's been worse. Again, I think our folks are learning in Florida. We did have a couple instances of trees falling on fences and cattle commingling. Most of those worked out well. They were, I think, good producers that were friends and had at least their adult cattle ID'd, so we worked that out pretty well. Sometimes that can get a little messy if you're not good neighbors and nobody has their cattle ID'd. Proving whose cows is whose is not easy always. So just as the storm's approaching, we know it's going to hit Florida. Usually we'll have a good 48 hours, 72 hours to really have a decent model of where it's going to hit. So we start having phone calls once a day with our SAR Partners, and that worked well in Irma. We had the Cattlemen on. We had our Fish and Wildlife folks. We had HSUS, great partners. I don't know if y'all in other states work with them. They're great on the small animal issues. They actually flew into the 2 counties that were projected to be hit the hardest, which is Lee County, Collier County, and worked with the counties and moved a large number of animals out of their shelters to make room, because they knew there were going to be stray animals. There were going to be people animals that they picked up that they had to have housing for. So our SART partners are a huge resource for us. Again, a call once a day, usually before the storm and immediately after, or whatever it is, animal disease or what. We really involve them. And most of the time, those partners make those calls and really help us decide what the industry needs, and sometimes it's things we didn't even think about. One thing we did this year is the cattlemen were saying, hey, the storm's going to hit late September. We're a big cow-calf state. A lot of folks are they're about to sell move their calves anyway, wean them and move them anyway out west or up along the up north to graze. So they said, get DOT to waive the weight restrictions, because we're going to move some before the storm and right after the storm to get them out of the high water. We're going to be moving a bunch of calves, and it will help us tremendously if you can get DOT to waive the weight restrictions. And we did that, and that helped facilitate get a lot of those cattle out of Florida and move that we're going to move anyway about that time. So that's an example of really listening to your industry partners and understanding what they need, and that helps really us do a better job of responding and managing these emergencies. We staff the Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee at that point. We activate our incident management team. We decide who's going to be in the incident management team. We have all that set up before the storm even hits. We have different staging areas where we already call the people. We call the counties or the IFAS extension offices and make sure we know where we're going to go. We have multiple different options depending on what the storm does. So we're ready to hit the ground after the storm passes and the danger's over, and we can move in. And usually that's 12 to 48 hours afterwards, depending on the storm. We work with our joining states, so thank you to, I don't know if you folks are in here, but to Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Usually we call those folks, those state veterinarians, and ask them to waive their animal movement requirements. So health certificate, Coggins test, whatever it is, and they have been very gracious in doing that. And we've got a system to manage that, and I'll talk about that in a second. That picture is actually from Hurricane Irma. That's actually in the central part of the state where they had a lot of flooding. They did get those cows moved, but we had a lot of water. It was a lot of water issues, obviously, and wind damage. So I mentioned waiving the movement requirements. Again, it's frustrating for us. It takes a lot of time. What we have, if y'all don't know, in Florida is we have interdiction stations. Our agricultural law enforcement folks have 23 interdiction stations that are along the Swanee River, so you really can't get into the body of Florida without crossing one of those. So folks that are evacuating from the majority of Florida, usually those areas that are getting hit by a hurricane, if they don't have their documents, whatever it is, testing or health certificate, they have to stop at an interdiction station. And if they don't have their required documents, they get what we call an advisory form. And we tell them, hey, you probably need a health certificate to go to Georgia, and you definitely need a Coggins test in Florida to move at all. So you're in violation. We give them that. They can leave. They tell us where they're going. We send that to the state of destination. Sometimes they follow up. Sometimes they can't. But so to get back in Florida, those folks either have to have gotten their health certificate and Coggins test, or when they come back in, we actually quarantine them back home to get those documents. So you get a free pass to move, but you don't get in the end a free pass not to have the correct documents. So that's how we manage that. It works well. It's a lot of work and communication. We actually put information out, put it up on our website, let our SART partners know, just a way we can communicate to industry. We don't want people staying back to save their animals. If they feel like they got to move their animals and they'll leave, take your animals and leave, and we'll catch you on the backside. And that's just a picture. I don't think I have a pointer, but basically the interdiction stations are all these points, and they're staggered around the Swanee River just when you cross any of the bridges. We also have one station out in Pensacola to catch the I-10 traffic. So our hurricane response, I'll just send some pictures. That is the Emergency Operations Center, the big picture there in the middle. And that's where there's almost like a circular room, obviously a huge room, and on the outskirt of that are small rooms where the emergency staffing function people reside to handle their specific issues, and that's our ESF 17 room staff. So it's pretty small, as you can see, but it works well. It was a huge storm, huge evacuation, 7 million people evacuated. 585 county human shelters opened. It was a record 350,000 plus people were in the shelters, and we actually called in the National Guard, the Florida National Guard, to help with that effort. I think this is a record as well. We had over 100 pet-friendly shelters open. Our SART partners were huge in this. The HSUS, we have a SART, which is State Agricultural Response Coalition, I think. Coalition, I think it is, and they really assist counties with the animal sheltering and have a lot of experience in that. And so some of the counties needed help, needed expertise, needed an extra shelter, and they went down and helped with that. We actually had a request, actually, when the storm was imminent. Basically, they had shut down the roads, and we had a request, I think it was from either Lee or, I think it was Lee County, they didn't have enough crates. And, they're telling us too late. But the National Guard said, we can do it. And we actually got over 4,000 animal crates shipped really as the storm was hitting to help get the animals in the proper, proper sheltering, proper cages so they could house them. So the hurricane did hit on September 10th as a Category 4. And again, most of the damage was, as you can imagine, wind and rain. We opened our ICP with an incident management team on September 12th, so about a day and a half later that morning, and we hit the ground running. Those are our folks there. And again, we train constantly. We do all the ICS training. We have exercises, usually one large exercise with multiple counties and agencies at least once a year, and our folks are trained in that. Work a lot with our USDA partners as well, and they help tremendously as well. We try to get our SART partners, if it works for them, depending on what the issues are, at the ICP with us to help with some of the issues. And we did that, and you can see their picture here. And so that just gives you an idea of kind of the size, the magnitude of the people at our ICP. 87 people participated. We do field assessment, so we actually go out physically and we call a lot as well, make a lot of phone calls, but we also go out to the counties and talk to their emergency folks. How are things going? What are your needs? And really put boots on the ground to put eyes on it. Sometimes they're frantic, don't communicate as well, so we actually go out and meet with them, talk to them, see what's going on. We meet with our SART partners and ask them what are they hearing from their industries. We go to the feed stores. We meet with producers. We really try to get an idea of what the real needs are to get an accurate assessment. So that's what we usually do the first several days to really understand what's going on and what the needs are. We actually sent a veterinary team from the University of Florida. Again, we train with them constantly. We sent them down to the Florida Keys. Basically, the roads were closed to the public well after the other roads in Florida were open. And they had no electricity down there. I don't know if y'all been to the Keys, but it's a one road in, one road out. Electricity same way. And when that gets damaged, you're stuck. And so there were pets. There were people that stayed in Key West. So originally the vets team stopped, I think, in kind of Key Largo. Treated several pets there, did some work there, and then headed down to Key West and treated quite a few animals, mostly dogs, but I think they saw some pet birds and cats and things. They saw different things. Dog fights, I think. They had some big dog, little dog stuff because dogs are loose from the storm. The veterinary clinics did not have electricity, so anything that you needed to have refrigerated was, their medications were not good. So insulin and some of the antibiotics and those types of things. So they were coming to our vets team. They're fully sustainable. They have generators. They have all the drugs needed. They do a good job. They can even set up to do surgeries if needed, those types of things. So they did a great job. We actually, during this, because this was in the central part of the state, we have 8 large animal technical rescue teams, and they train again, multiple trainings a year, and go through pretty extensive training on how to do large animal rescue, usually horses, but not always. Get them out of pits, get them out of high water, those types of things. That's run through the University of Florida, and they do a great job. We rescued, I think, some small ruminants actually from really high water, and then we swam out, I want to say 5 or 6 horses from high water. They were stranded, the water's rising, and they were going to be in trouble. So our team there did a great job. And again, it's just a coordination between University of Florida, county folks. This is our wildlife officers helping with that rescue as well. And again, I'm just going to, all these are pictures. It's just really our SART partners helping. IFAS Extension's huge. They really have boots on the ground. They know the industry. They help us a lot with what are the needs and help us distribute hay. They're actually, I think that's a blueberry farm. They were helping them. I don't even know what they were doing, but get back on track and what they needed to kind of get going again. The Florida Cattlemen, I think there was a farm that actually didn't have high enough ground. There was so much water that the cattle were starting to were going to be basically flooded. And so they swam them out, and the Florida Cattlemen helped move, I think it was 700 head of cattle to another farm, another neighbor farm that had high enough ground so they could save those cows. Our dairies in South Florida had a significant issue. Again, electricity, you can't milk. There are actually feed issues. You can't get the feed to them. The feed mills can't get feed, so they can't make the feed. And so we really had to work on those feed issues. CSX Rail supplied some of our big feed stores down there, and they wouldn't run, one, because they didn't think the tracks were safe. When we got that settled, they still didn't want to run. And our dairies were really hurting. So we actually ended up, our assistant commissioner, I think, called Secretary Perdue's office. I don't know what happened after that, but they started moving feed. So that's kind of those. You guys know how that is. I mean, there's always something. There's always an issue, and you have to just do what you have to do to get things done. We had 2 staging areas for donations, just so we could logistically, because really we kind of had the Miami southeast coast as well as the southwest coast that needed assistance. And vector control issue is under ESF 17. So another division within the Department of Agriculture is the Agriculture and Environmental Services, and they really work with our county mosquito control districts to get spraying done when needed. And I have notes, and I don't even know how to get to them, but I'll try to remember the stats. But this right here is 1 night of mosquito trapping. I think this is about a week. It usually takes a week for the cycle of mosquitoes to really hatch out and do all that. And I think that was like 6-7 days later. That was 1 trap with like 21 or 22,000 mosquitoes. So I think we had 32 of our 67 counties request assistance for mosquito spraying to help with the vector problems, and we did that. So these are just additional actions, and I'm almost done here, but I talked about the dairy issue. We worked with food for the dairies as well as fuel. So the roads were closed to the general public, and they were needing fuel for those dairies. And so we worked with our agricultural law enforcement, and they kind of pushed, I guess, to DOT and the Highway Patrol and allowed these truckers to move fuel and food in. Again, I talked about the rail car issue for feed delivery. And then we help a lot really facilitate our producers or those agricultural folks that need assistance. We can't provide everything, right? So some of the dairies needed these huge, massive generators. The co-op had some. There's other companies that you can rent them, lease them. So we just help facilitate those types of issues so they can get up and running and take care of their animals or crops. This is a brief slide on the losses. This is estimated losses from our department economist. Ran some numbers on that. As you can see, if y'all know much about the citrus industry in Florida, we've been hurt really bad by multiple diseases and pests. Citrus greening is probably the worst, most significant issue of late. Our orange crop's been way down, and these guys, I feel bad for them because this past year was going to be one of our better years, at least in recent years. And they had looked like a better crop yield. They're managing some of the pests a little bit better. And then here comes Hurricane Irma, and the fruit was old enough. It wasn't quite ready to harvest, but it was old enough, it was heavy enough that it all just got blown off the trees. So we did get finally with Agricultural Putnam's really request to Secretary Perdue and to Congress. I think we've got some help for those folks. So just lessons learned and challenges. Again, as I mentioned, we really use our industry partners, governmental agency, governmental partners or non-governmental partners as well. Communication's key with everybody throughout the whole, prior to and during the incident. Training and building those relationships before the hurricane or the event happens. Counties are always going to need help with pet sheltering. A lot of county managers don't want to face that issue. They don't really want to think about it. They don't want to admit it's their responsibility. They don't really want to think about what the costs might be. They get very nervous about it, and we just have to keep trying to bring them into reality and let them know it is their issue and it's going to be their concern. And the last thing they want is to be the county that didn't have shelters ready, so you got people staying home with their animals and people and animals dying. Donations are often difficult. One is, we get some fairly generous donations from other states, other corporations, companies. They often want tax write-off. It's hard for us to do this as a state. So usually we'll funnel that maybe through one of our SART partners. But it gets to be a little bit cumbersome. And then what do you do once the immediate need is over and you're starting to push those agriculture producers back to private businesses like feed stores, what are you going to do with the extra supplies? Who owns that? Who gets to use that, right? So those are issues we kind of deal with and try to work through. We did that in IRMA as well. When to stop providing assistance. That if you deal with an emergency in your state, and if you're a producer, I hope you hear this. We got a lot of donations. We gave a lot of feed and took a lot of feed to farms, a lot of hay, a lot of grain, we have to really be careful, because when the feed stores open back up, when those feed mills are up and running, we don't want to supplant them, right? We just want to be there as an emergency buffer to help people, and then when the infrastructure gets running again, we need to pull out. But people like getting free stuff. And when they call you one day and you say, well, I know we've been giving you X number of round bales a day for your cattle, but the feed store down the street's open now and they've got good hay, so, give them a call. They don't like that. They want the free hay. And they'll call the commissioner and they'll call me and be upset that we're not giving them free hay anymore. So you'll deal with those issues, but you really have to pay attention. When, like the vet clinics in Miami, in the Key West, they called the office one day and said, hey, your vet team's down here still treating animals, and we got our power back. We're up and running. And they were, a little upset, asking questions. And that's a good point, right? Once the local community can support the industry, we need to pull out. So, FEMA doesn't pay for agricultural issues, right? So they don't buy hay, they don't buy feed, they don't support really agriculture. The only thing that really FEMA reimbursements for is for really pet sheltering. That's what they pay for. And so we have to deal with that and work with our state legislature, and a lot of it comes out of my budget, which is tough sometimes.
I just have a few things to add in a little bit different approach than what Dr. Short had regarding the hurricane experience in Florida this year with Hurricane Irma. I leave this slide up here because I want to give credit where credit is due, and our emergency management staff, Jeff Turner being the emergency management director, and his crew put this slide presentation together, and it's got lots of pictures and cool stuff in it that if it was left up to me, it would be 50 words a slide and we'd all be sitting here bored to death. So wanted to point that out. And so I want to kind of run through, like I say, just a little bit different tack and talk about, some of the stuff associated with our response to Hurricane Harvey. And then talk about some of the players involved, some of the response activities, certainly touch on lessons learned, like Dr. Munchik asked us to do. We'll touch on some of the ID pieces in Texas, how this played out with the hurricane activities and all of that good stuff. And I've only got, I think, 48 slides. And we're making these available. I'm not going to cover all these slides. There's no way that I could get through that many slides in 30 minutes anyway, even close. So it will be available. So please, if you have any questions about any of the stuff on there or anything else, just please feel free to contact us, and we'll be glad to visit with you. And I want to thank Dr. Short. He covered a lot of the big pieces and parts already, and certainly the planning perspective. All of this is wonderful when it's going on, but the stuff that you're doing before the event happens is where this all comes together. And so I'm going to talk about a few things during the response piece of this. So Hurricane Harvey, as Dr. Short mentioned, typically we have some warning with hurricanes. You get these timelines that the emergency management folks put out, the T-120s and all of this stuff. Well, this one was a little bit different, because when it came across the Yucatan Peninsula, it was a tropical depression wave thing. And when it got across the Yucatan, it developed into a tropical storm, and that's when we ramped up as a state to start watching the track on this deal. And within 24 hours, it moved to Category 4 hurricane and hit Texas. Very early on, from Animal Health Commission perspective, we were very concerned because one of the big tracks took it straight in through Brownsville and through the heart of our fever tick eradication quarantine areas, and we were very concerned about having to deal with dipping vats and movement of quarantined animals and all kinds of stuff there that were in surge plains and flood zones. That didn't happen. It moved up, and this is what we ended up with. So Hurricane Harvey was really a couple of three different events all rolled into one. Certainly from the impact related to a hurricane, you think about the wind and the storm surge and all of those things, and that did happen. Luckily, the storm surge was not as significant as it was in like Hurricane Ike, where it went a long way inland there. And where it hit right here between Corpus Christi and Port O'Connor, certainly there was some wind and there was some damaging rain and some surge and some things like that. But really, the rest of the story on this storm happened as it moved inland and made this loop. Let me back up one more. And made this loop kind of into this part of Texas and then back across and out and back in. And so what it created was this tremendous rain event that turned into a giant flooding event. So we had the surge issues that kind of backed everything up to start with. Then we had this huge rain event. And here's just some graphics on some of that. 51.88 inches, the new North American record in the Cedar Bayou. And we had producers over here in this part from Houston back towards Beaumont, cattle producers that gave us unofficial reports of things like 60 inches of rain. I mean, that's 5 feet of water on top of a surge issue that won't let anything run out anyway. And then you couple that with the fact, and here's a couple of pictures. Everybody saw these on CNN. This is what ended up being the huge event, was you had all the water, you had all the rain, but it covered such a large area upstream that then all the flooding had to come down the rivers and get into the Gulf at some point. And this picture is actually a picture outside of Wharton, Texas. It's an aerial photograph that our chairman of our Animal Health Commission took. That's some of his purebred cattle. This is a picture of the Colorado River. It was about 8 miles wide at that point, and that's why it looks like it's flowing water, because that's flowing Colorado River across there. So the impact on this was tremendous. And you think about, this is a little bit different topic maybe for an animal care type group, but certainly if you think about the impacts on animals, not only the small animals with all the evacuation stuff that had to occur with this situation, but the livestock as well. Anything we can do to plan and prepare and respond and help with these situations is certainly in the venue of animal care and improving that. So this is just a map to show kind of the declared areas, the counties in Texas that received disaster declarations from the federal government. There's 53 of those, and it's actually 60 were given declarations by our governor. But you look at that area and you look at the rest of the state, and that's not that big, but that's almost as big as South Carolina, that area that was impacted there. And so you think about all the rain and all the water, again, that had to move down and out, and it just lingered and it lasted, and it was the only good thing about it was fresh water. Unlike Hurricane Ike, where you had that huge saltwater surge that killed pastures, and then animals were stranded, livestock were stranded, surrounded by water with nothing to drink. So that was the only good thing. Alex, yes, sir. Tarrant and Dallas were on there from the governor's standpoint because that was where most of the evacuees went. And so the impacts up there were pretty significant just because of the number of people. So, good question. I'm not going to belabor this slide, but this kind of gives you just a timeline from our perspective of things going on. We're obviously very involved with emergency management and planning and preparation. One of the things that we certainly are tasked to do is to work with counties through the animal issues committees, is what we call them, and those are meetings that we have with those groups within the counties, the ones that will participate. We had some counties that did not want to participate for many years, and then happened to have Harvey hit them, and we've had a lot of phone calls and a lot of increased interest. So the long story of this is, we started having communications with our stakeholders and within our internal structure to start thinking about if this comes in, because again, we were worried originally about this hitting fever tick country, and we were, internally definitely worried about how we were going to handle all of that. But as it progressed, we realized that communication with our external stakeholders and getting that rolling, and then standing up our Animal Response Operations Coordination Center was an important part of that. So we did this for about 21 days, And, you know, that's phone calls, lots and lots of conference calls and discussions and everything else. And we actually stood up our physical Animal Response Operations Coordination Center, the AROC is what we call it, for 11 days there in the Austin office. So I'll talk about that. So just Hurricane Harvey by the number and what were the impacts. You know, there's all kinds of stuff here. To me, the take home on this is you get over on that right-hand side and you start looking at the number of shelters. And so you see 40 state co-located shelters. Those are the ones that, you know, were in all the plans, and the health department and Red Cross and all those people are all about and they know about, and these are the things going on. But what got interesting was at 99 independent shelters. And many of these were just-in-time shelters that stood up. It was sale barns that were in impacted areas and said, bring your livestock, bring your cattle, bring your horses, we'll feed them, we'll help you take care of them, we'll give you a place to... It was great. None of that was planned for. It was just one of those things that happened. And so that's certainly one of the take-home messages, and I'll say this over and over, is in the middle of one of these events, when stuff like that happens, utilize it. Take advantage of those resources, take them up on anybody's offer, and then when you're done, circle back around to those folks and see if you can codify that or capture that and put it in your plans for the next time. That's a really important take-home message. So you can see there 2,300-ish livestock sheltered, 1,400 companion animals sheltered. Not only sale barns, but you know, county fairgrounds. Some of those were planned because a lot of these counties had been hit with some floods the year before. So they kind of had some ideas on some things that were going to have to happen there. But we also had vet clinics, and we had, you know, just people who showed up and said, I've got space, we can put up a shelter here and work through that. So those were a lot of challenges there. Donations management's a whole other set of topics and discussions. That's a bear, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other thing, though, that I wanted to point out is that livestock assessment piece. And that ties back to our Animal Health Commission staff that responded. At the time of landfall of this hurricane, our agency was about 172 people. 119 of those folks responded to the hurricane in some fashion, whether that was working in the call bank, working documentation, being in the IMT, in the AROC, in the field doing assessments, coordinating field work, whatever that was. But 119 of our staff were involved, and so that left everybody else to do the rest of the work in the state, and it really was quite an undertaking, and I'm very proud of our folks and the work that they got done. You look at that livestock assessment piece, and we've got some partners, and I'll talk about that, how that kind of played out. But 117 tons of hay dropped, 1,200 pounds of cubes. And so when I talk about being dropped, a lot of this was dropped out of helicopters. And that was one of those things that we had not done or been involved with before, but as it played out was really a valuable tool. And I'll talk about how that came up, how that happened. So just some more numbers. Agricultural losses. Again, this picture here might have belonged in the Winter Storm Goliath talk I gave a couple of years back. That's not a blizzard. That's cotton. So in the impacted area down there on the southern part of the Gulf, or middle coast, where the storm actually blew in, they'd already picked cotton, and so they had modules all over everywhere. And when that deal blew in, it just took that cotton and scattered it to the wind there, and it looked like we'd had a blizzard in that part of the coastal counties. So tremendous loss of cotton there, 200,000 plus bales. Right there somewhere. The livestock numbers, again, the actual loss of livestock was probably not as great as it might have been, again, because we'd had some floods in some of those highly or most hard impacted areas, that people kind of knew what was coming and were able to get their livestock out and deal with that. And it was just because we'd had an event already and they were familiar. But a lot of the infrastructure, we don't know what the hard numbers are on livestock losses yet, because part of that federal assistance period was extended with the National Resource Conservation Service and Farm Services Administration to get the registrations and the applications in, and that ended in March. So we don't have all of the numbers on that yet. So we'll see what that plays out. But surprisingly, if you look at that and kind of think through that. Estimated 1.2 million head of cattle in those impacted areas, and our death losses that we're aware of at this point, talking to industry, is a very small percentage, very small percentage. some more. We've already seen some of these, but this picture here on the bottom is, this is not something you see every day, a John Deere tractor loading a round bale of hay into a helicopter, with military folks. Or we've got some great videos. I don't have those in this presentation, but of the hay drop activities that went on, the National Guard loading hay in helicopters and rolling it out the back and everything else. Pretty cool stuff. Just real briefly, what is our role in this? Not to belabor this, but statutorily we're tasked with being the lead agency for animal issues in emergency situations. That's paraphrasing, but so we accomplish that primarily by being very much so engaged in the planning and preparation parts of that. So again, that gets back to those animal issues committees and being involved in state planning efforts, but also in response, doing coordination. We don't have the people, we don't have the resources to do all this stuff. So in the peace times, we're planning, we're coordinating with people who do have the stuff or can get the stuff, and then when it's on, we're coordinating. We're standing up communications to have conference calls, facilitate conference calls amongst other groups that need to coordinate, standing up our AROC. So in the structure, it's local up. We have our field staff that go to the district disaster coordination centers and staff those. And so things that come up animal issue related through that structure from the locals go to there. It gets vetted. If it can't be filled, it comes up to State Operations Center. We have staff in there that take those, and if it is a logistics issue or something like that, they can turf that over to emergency management and they can help fill that. If it's not something like that, then it comes over to the AROC. And we work that deal, figure out through our relationships and interactions with our response partners how to deal with that, and then either deal with it or send it back with an answer to the State Operations Center to implement. So that's kind of how that works. And you can see the makeup of the AROC there. So this is just a picture, of the AROC. This is our large conference room, and we have the ability to split that in half. So this piece up here is our livestock, primarily livestock part of the AROC, and you can see there's quite a few folks there. The other side of the room was over here, and that was the companion animal piece. And again, it's coordination, and we spend a lot of time coordinating with NGOs, local NGOs, regional NGOs, to provide them structures to facilitate communication and work through those issues. In Austin, Texas, when all this was going on, it was actually brought on a little bit cooler temperatures, and so this was one of our planning meetings. After the first round of conference calls in the morning, we went outside to get a little fresh air and have a little planning meeting there. So, Dr. Short mentioned the response partners, and I have to put some of this up. This is maybe not quite exactly some of the things that we should talk about, but we can't do this without our response partners. And in peacetime, developing those relationships with those response partners is key. You have to get out there, know who the players are, have contacts, and not be trying to figure that out in the face of the event. So anything you can do preparedness-wise, your local response partners, again, we work at the county level, not much the city level, but certainly within the county, the city, the people or city groups are involved in that, and that's our animal issues committees that we work towards. State response partners, you look at this list and think, well, yeah, there's kind of all the regular players. You got to have, environmental folks on there, health department. Can't say enough about Texas A&M, the system. Certainly the College of Veterinary Medicine and their capabilities and the things that they accomplished with deployment of the Veterinary Emergency Response Team or the VET team. Our State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners, that's another piece to take home. If you ever think you may have an incident where you're going to need to bring outside veterinary support in, legally figure out that process for licensure before it happens. And we have done that, luckily. It worked great. I mean, literally it was boom and go in, and I have a picture of that. Texas Military Forces. That's one of those kind of outside the box. We had not worked with Texas Military Forces before, but it all ties back into that hay situation where we utilize some resources from a federal partner, USDA Wildlife Services, who's got air assets to be able to coordinate that hay drop with the military forces. So there's some pictures. Again, You see these things, the bloating of hay into a Chinook and the supplies going into helicopters for the military forces, the great work that the vet team did. And one of the challenges with the vet team, we've been talking to Dr. Bissett for a number of years. We work very closely with them. You know, what are you going to do when we have something really big happen? You know, because they've got a lot of stuff, but they kind of had it put together to be able to go to one or two places. And that was kind of the thought. But we had been having those conversations about, well, what if you needed to split this thing up? How would you work that? How would that look? And they had obviously spent some time considering that, because they ended up at one point in 9 different locations scattered from kind of the southern mid-coast all the way to Beaumont, and had resources out there in all of those places, and did work like this in the shelters, you know, horses that needed to be looked at, or beef cattle that came in and needed to be triaged and something done with. Certainly the companion animal piece, they did a lot of work there. This is just a picture of our state board and what went up on their website. That application process was seamless. We had a tremendous amount of volunteers from other states. We didn't call on very many, but certainly had lots of volunteers that went through this process and heard good things. So put this slide in to talk about some of our federal response partners. You know, APHIS, VS, obviously we work with them a lot in just day-to-day activities, but you get into the companion animal piece, and I'll talk about zoos in just a minute, because that became an issue. The animal care folks, USDA animal care folks, bring a tremendous amount of contacts and knowledge of different facilities, and even more importantly, the mechanisms to get some things in place from the federal government to help respond to these big events. So these bottom 2 here, though, are kind of some atypical ones. And if you haven't ever had to deal with one of these events where it impacted animal agriculture, you might think about the role that those 2 play, not necessarily in the response piece of it, but in the recovery piece of it. And again, we don't do a lot of recovery, but it's important to have them sitting at the table during the response part of it, so they can give us the information, and our other partners that are engaged on the ground, to give us the information to tell producers and whoever else is eligible for programs, you need to collect this information. You need to know these things, so that when it comes time to get to the recovery phase and these programs roll out, you've got what you need to be able to apply and hopefully get some assistance. So we learned that actually from our wildfire experience in early 2017, and then certainly in Winter Storm Goliath in late 15, early 16. So there we have them built into our plans. It gets back to that, you know, find out if there's somebody that's got something or has some resources during the event. Man, bring them to the table and get them involved, but then certainly go back afterwards and get them roped into the plan and figure that out. USDA Wildlife Services, we had not used their assets before, and they were sitting over there kind of on the corner of the conference call going, hey, you know, we got some helicopters and some trailers and stuff. And nobody really thought anything about it until it got time to go out and do the assessment piece, which is a big piece of what we do. And we thought, man, there's miles and miles of water. We can't get to anything and see. These guys said, hey, we've got our helicopters. We'll go out. And it really worked well, because they had, you know, they're used to looking and doing surveys. So they can mark things, send that information back, and we were able to coordinate that with the military forces to drop the hay and do those things. One other thing I would mention about the response, and it's something that was new to us, and it hasn't, I don't think, been used very much in Texas in general, is the EMAC process. We realized that there were some gaps in some things that we needed some help with. And we also knew that there were some people in the country, in some other states, that had some expertise that could help us get through and address those gaps. Bringing in Dr. Tickle from North Carolina, who's done a lot of emergency management, is one of the gurus, has done a lot of response for hurricanes and flooding in North Carolina and dealing with animal issues. Was great to bring in as a subject matter expert to help our branch commander, or it wasn't really an incident command in AROC, because it's a branch, so it's a branch commander, to help us work through some issues there, give us some insight. Was great. Tennessee Department of Agriculture sent over a communication specialist that was great to help us with social media, and she had been involved with the floods in Tennessee, and so was really helpful with those pieces and parts. So appreciate all of the help from the other states that we were able to EMAC some folks in. Don't be afraid to try that. It works great. And it's really pretty seamless if you have kind of had that conversation with your emergency management folks prior to. So if you haven't had that conversation, it's probably worth having at some point. Got 2 slides or so worth of NGOs. Again, can't do this without the NGOs, especially the companion animal part. In the greater Houston area, the Houston SPCA was kind of the regional NGO to coordinate a lot of the sheltering, the evacuation, the capture and containment, all of those pieces and parts there. So again, develop those relationships and get to know those folks. Couldn't have done it without the veterinary medical folks, the associations, the equine vets that showed up at some of the shelters, the big shelters, and helped take care of the equine in those situations. Again, this is just a list. Our industry partners that we work with all the time. Again, fantastic folks, making sure that if there's if there's a need, it's getting moved, and we're getting that stuff, whatever it is. If they can help, they're helping coordinate that and sending materials, hay, feed, whatever that is to work through that. Got the zoos on here. I'm going to talk about the zoos in just a minute. So just a few more pictures of field response. Talked about the fact that we, like Florida, go out and do assessments. That's interaction with folks on the ground, dumping some feed, helping feed some cows or taking care of some horses or some things like that, coordinating with shelters and checking in with them, talking to the locals, surveillance, putting hay on the Cajun Navy's boats. That was an interesting responder. So again, just pictures. Donations management, again, we've got some fantastic partners in the AgriLife extension as part of the A&M system. They coordinate and do these donation or supply points, animal supply points. We ended up with 13 of those in this response. And it did become a challenge. Like you mentioned, Dr. Short, what do you do with this stuff after everything's kind of calmed down? How do you do that? And they do a great job managing that with the locals. The challenge here became we had this one down here was kind of the first one because that was close to the impact area. That's a long way to where we needed a lot of that stuff. And so one of the challenges became how do we coordinate getting the hay and the feed and all those materials moved to those other supply points. And we worked that out, but it's another piece we're going to go back and look at and try to capture some more information with them. That was just one of the things we had up on the website. They were running a call bank. We ran a call bank. The Department of Agriculture also ran a call bank, and that's another lesson learned is we've got to streamline in Texas. We've got to streamline our donation management at the state level, so we get one point for people to call and coordinate providing materials or helping move materials or whatever. So that was one of the points that became difficult. It's like Dr. Short said, you spend a week talking about donations management, trying to work this out because that's a huge deal. Everybody shows up, wants to help, wants to send stuff, and that's wonderful. But at some point, you get to the place of we've got all of it. Now, what are we going to do with it? So this is really kind of towards the end of the deal and what I wanted to get to. So this is kind of a list. This is the common things. These are the themes that we see in every response. These are the issues, whether it's something as big as Hurricane Harvey or the wildfires or the winter storm or a flood. These become the issues that we continue to work on and address. Certainly in the events, we've learned some things and we try to go back and capture that. Transportation, evacuation, I've talked about the fact that we really got lucky on this one in some ways because there had been a flooding event. So people already kind of had it down to how to get stuff out. I mean, this dog here, he was prepared now. He packed up his dog food and left. That's a fantastic picture. I don't know who took that or where that came from. It's a fantastic picture. So and those dogs in the top there, they're ready. They're in the boat waiting on the captain. So but one of the things I wanted to point out on this, and so another thing that we do for preparedness is along with our animal issues committees, we talk to locals and to livestock facilities to try to identify evacuation points, large animal evacuation points especially. So, and we're pretty good with capturing that information and having those conversations, a lot of time that conversation goes, no, I'm not interested in doing that. And then in the event, they stand up and take livestock. And that's fine. That's good. You know, we've had those conversations, or at least aware. But one of the challenges is getting that information out. And so we had this list of the large animal holding facilities, or the places that would take large animals. We had a list from all our NGOs and other companion animal folks of shelters, and from our counties and all of that we had these lists of shelters. But trying to disseminate that, you know, we were getting call after call about, hey, I'm trying to go to is there somewhere we can go? And we stumbled into this 211. And I don't know a whole lot about it, other than I know it's like 911, but you call when you're trying to get information. We gave them the information. They've got all of the capacity with all of the operators and all of those, you know, call centers and everything to take that information. We provided them updates every day, and we just put out on our web page, and our stakeholders, our partners, put out on their web pages, if you're evacuating with these animals, call 211. Give them your destination, and they can help you find a place to take those to. That was just fantastic. So if you haven't looked at 211 or one of those mechanisms, that's great. Zoos helping zoos. So this really got interesting because we had this zoo in Victoria, Texas, that back in '98 essentially went underwater when the Guadalupe River flooded. And we were having those conversations with them during this event, going, you're going to get underwater because the flood in '98 was smaller than what's coming now. And, well, no, it's going to be okay. So that went on. They got to the point where, oh, no, this isn't going to work. And luckily, again, in the companion animal side of the AROC, we had the animal care folks sitting in there, and we had contacts with zoo folks, zoo groups, that were able to coordinate this. We're going to go help the Victoria Zoo and get the stuff out. And so I don't remember the statistics offhand of what actually was lost, but it was not much. They got everything out of there. They figured out how to do that. And that's another piece we're going back to. You know, we didn't have anything like that in our plans. But boy, howdy, that's a big deal. You can't just send, even though our livestock inspectors have got dog poles, we didn't think we couldn't convince any of them to go in there and get that lion out. I just thought, man, come on, guys. So anyway, that's a big piece, and we're continuing to work with those groups to flesh that out and make a more robust response mechanism there. So sheltering, we can talk about sheltering. The one reason I wanted to touch on this is it's great when you have these planned shelters and everybody knows all the things that are going to go on, but one of the things we got into that we had not stressed enough to these facilities is biosecurity. What happened when you got all these rescued horses or dropped off horses standing there and one of them breaks with strangles? Yeah. So that's another piece that we're going back to and working on to make sure we incorporate those biosecurity, you know, isolation pens, quarantine, you know, however they need to handle that, but they need to think about that and work through that. So another challenge to this became the reporting. We don't have a mechanism in place that consistently captures that sheltering information. That's another piece. Just documentation in general, this is another lesson learned, is tough. When you're in the middle of one of these responses and you hadn't done this in a long time, we hadn't done this essentially in any large scale since 2008 when Ike hit. And the documentation piece was something that we had not devoted enough time to after Ike to brush off and pull back out. Now we've come a long way since during and since Harvey in coming up with mechanisms, templates, and everything else to do that. So the one thing on ID, Texas is not a brand law, or is not a brand state. We've got brand laws, so if they're branded, we've got some folks that can help us with that, and that was another group that we pulled in very rapidly to help with that, because they're the ones that, you know, enforce the law on identification for ownership. But really, the take-home message with this is unless you're in a state where there's something like brand laws, if your producers aren't IDing animals, and we get into these situations, we had sets of cattle, we had no idea who they belonged to. And we hope that, you know, the folks that showed up to claim them, that they really did belong to them. So I think, you know, by and large that was the case. But carcass issues, and I apologize for the nature of these slides, but that's always an issue. Know what your laws are in your state on how to deal with that. In Texas, carcasses in a disaster, a natural disaster like this, are debris, and having those conversations with environmental quality folks and with the local officials to deal with that, you need to know that, put some stuff out, make sure the locals understand what that is. So we've talked about the public information piece, the social media, the 211, all of that is important. Social media deal is huge. We have a very small staff, and half of our staff, we've got 2, and half of our staff spent 16, 18 hours a day doing just social media, monitoring social media. So that becomes very, very important. And this slide here is where I'll quit. You know, in the heat of the battle, so to speak, and all of these big bad things are going on, but you get a message like this back up from the field, from a producer, that you impacted in a positive way, this is what makes it worth it. So I'll be glad to take any questions and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, TR. Great presentation.